our question and answer portion. We have 15 minutes for this, so we got to get going. Our first question is from, sorry, I lost my place in it. It's from Miss Elizabeth Carranza. Is that right? Okay, hold on. Too many questions, sorry. Everyone just started messaging me all at once. Okay, so this is from Canadian, sorry, this is from Miss Veronica Caparas from Vancouver, Canada. What is the course of action that we are to take after this expose? She writes for CanadianFilipino.net. Can anyone have an answer for that? Can we put Mr. Lechica also in the spotlight? Tech support. There you go. Are we the right people to ask about that? What are we to do? What's next? We have all this data. What is next?
Yes, Laura. Yes, like we discussed previously in preparation for this press conference, is that this is more than an academic exercise. Looking back, we are preparing for the midterm elections in 2025 and 2028, the presidential elections. So lessons learned, as pointed out by Phil and Walter and Gus, we have to take steps to ensure an accurate and fair elections in the midterms in 3 years. So based on the analysis by Phil especially, we should push hard on the recommendation of Mr. Gus Lagman to change the automated election system into a hybrid system where we do manual counting at the precinct level to ensure accuracy and transparency. So with that in mind, we have to work closely with our allied groups in the Philippines, to ensure to work with the COMELEC and hopefully get the Philippine, Senate and House to look at the recommendations and adopt them. So that would be, I think, my, recommendation that to our allies in the Philippines and our concerned leaders online. Kailangan natin kumilos. We should raise this issue quickly with the COMELEC, and hopefully there will be face-to-face meetings in the Philippines to review Mr. Lagman's recommendation.
Yeah, on that regard, also, I think we should just be all banding together as well with other efforts going on. I've heard that there is messaging coming out from somewhere saying that this press con is fake news. From my understanding, there is a press conference also happening in Katipunan right now at the same time with Mr. Franklin. Is it right? Franklin is Isaac leading it. They're having a press conference. We're having a press conference. This is not fake. As you can see, we have 3 experts. I mean, your Mr. Lechica is representing Mr. Gus Lagman. So yes, I think with just to add to what you said, I think this is the time that we should all band together with the evidence and the analysis that we've all gathered in this panel. Okay, I'll go on the next question.
Let me add first.
Yes.
Yes. So to add to what Eric mentioned, the reason for our presentation is not to overturn the election, right? Because it's too late for that. The reason for this presentation is to just mention the election integrity and democracy. So, and as Eric mentioned, hopefully implement the proposals of Gus Lagman in his paper. So, definitely not fake news, and it's just we're just here to tell the truth, and all the numbers that we've shown are all published data and published numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. I'll move on to the second question. Aside from the analysis, are there any COMELEC insiders who have provided smoking gun evidence or testimony that would stand in court? That's from, okay, I can't find who messaged that, but go ahead, if anyone could answer.
None that I know of.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next. All right. With all this, this is from Carol Lopez. With all these mathematical data based on election results, can these be firm basis for election protests? If not, why? Anyone could answer.
I haven't spoken yet, so I'll just say this. I've had cases where there are large protests, even though analysis using various tools by me, and eForensics is the latest, and I think most trustworthy of the various things I've used over the years, has not substantiated that there were substantial frauds in the election. So that's the message of the numbers that I came up with. And of course, you can decide whether you believe them or not, and it's just a method. But I think it has a pretty good soundness. I think it's important not to claim there are frauds when there are not frauds. And there are many articles I read suggest, of course, the Philippines has a long troubled history of problems in elections, but it could be there are lots of problems and lots of stolen votes and everything. But, that may not have been enough to change the election outcome. There was this very large political movement with this alliance about which I know very little. I just read about it last week. But it apparently had a big impact. It led voters to coordinate, but of course it also led people committing frauds like faking votes to coordinate. And so I think it will require analysis well beyond the kind of data that I looked at to get insight into how that went. So I think that the kind of reforms that the other two speakers talked about, especially the first one, seemed like good ideas. I don't have an opinion of whether they're the right thing to do or not. But I think anything that adds to transparency and legitimacy, credibility of the election process is got to be a good thing. And so I think that if people recognize the government as having been duly elected, if that's what it turns out to be, and that's what my analysis suggests happen, then move on with politics and reform the process and try to make it so that we don't have at least the same kinds of problems in the future. So I don't think there's a huge motivation from the results I showed, at least across the whole country, in particular provinces. There may be issues that are going on, like the one I showed with 40% fraudulent votes. That seems to have some problem there. But I wouldn't say that this is a reason to get into the streets. That's kind of misdirected effort. I would think getting into reforming the process and upping the quality of political participation is probably the better use of time and money.
Thank you, Professor Mebane. I'll move on to the next question. Do you have anything to add to that, Mr. Daly and Mr. Lachica?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, unless we find a smoking gun, it's going to be really hard to defend with the numbers that we have.
Just wanted to add to that note, as Phil said, the smoking gun seems to be the SD cards, right? The VCM, the machines. If we have access to at least several, like random, especially those areas where there's highly suspected padding, where it seemed that Marcos Jr. got more votes than the polling data would indicate in the previous. That's what I think there was an padding at certain levels of certain provinces that would show it should be in the SD card. When they're being fed all of those ballots, and the results of those ballots are reflect that there was additional ballots or votes given to the Marcos Duterte, Sara Duterte group. That's what could explain the differences, right, Phil, in between Robin Padilla.
Exactly.
I couldn't believe the numbers, that the difference between Robin Padilla, the Senate top vote getter, versus Marcos Jr. He overwhelmed even the top Senate vote getter.
I'm just a little confused because Mr. Engineer Daly's presentation said something about like a 20.1 million and 20.5 million kind of. The difference is only like about 500,000 votes if your analysis is to be followed. But on the other hand, it seems Professor Mebane says like it's not that significant of fraud to get out in the streets and protest. So
Yeah, but fraud is fraud, right?
it's like two very different analysis. So like as an activist myself, like I'm just like trying to weigh both analysis and just like trying to understand like what should we do,
just like my number is not gospel. I mean, same as Walter's numbers are not exact as well. These are all estimates, right? And the fact that he's finding at least, if I got it right, around 2.2 million possible fraudulent votes, right? So who's to say that it's more or less than that in the actual practice, right? And are you telling me they cheated, but they would have won if they didn't cheat? So why would they cheat in the first place if that was the case, right? So there's a lot of questions to be asked. I'm not saying that yes, Lenny won. I'm saying the numbers could possibly show that if the trends were the same as in historical elections, but definitely we'll never really know. And if you look at Gus Lagman's presentation, he was mentioning the current system relies very much on the COMELEC and whether we trust them or not, and Smartmatic, right? So that's where if there's going to be a smoking gun, it's going to be there somewhere. But unless somebody shows up and tells us that something happened, we have to trust that they did what was right, and if you can't prove it, then it didn't happen, right?
Yeah, I think the issue for the judgment is whether you believe that this alliance had such large-scale, genuine political consequences.
Yes.
And this is beyond my scope. I mean, as a political scientist, I should be able to evaluate this kind of question, but I don't sit in the Philippines, so I don't know. Because if you believe there was this historic mobilization, that would explain the kind of things that Phil Daly found. It's just historic mobilization for the candidates, and of course, it looks unusual. But the issue is, did that actually happen genuinely? And so, to my mind,
the title of the paper.
and so, presumably, folks will evaluate that down the road using the kind of survey discrepancies that Eric talked about and so forth. I just don't know how that's going to work out. I'm unfamiliar with the data entirely beyond the data analyzed. Yeah. I'll just say that my aspiration for eForensics and generally for this research project, election forensics that I have, is to make it possible to find evidence to prove one way or another whether the election outcome was correct. And so we don't have to rely on evaluation of the performance of the chips or the little SD devices or any of that. It's a research project, and I'm pretty far from having achieved that goal. And it may be impossible to do, but that's my aspiration with the project. So we don't have just big question mark, but we have more confidence, at least, if not certainty, that we can actually say we might not like the election outcome, or we might like the election outcome, but we can rely on it either being, the right outcome, or we can tell it's the wrong outcome.
And Walter, precisely that's why the title of my paper was this the greatest election campaign ever, or a scam, right? And definitely the alliance will have an effect on the votes, right? But just looking, my favorite province to look at, and I'm looking at the numbers, is Cebu, right? Back in 2016, when Marcos and Lenny had at it at the vice president election, Lenny got 800,000 votes in Cebu. Marcos got 300,000 votes, and the leading senator got 1.1 million votes. Okay, this year the leading senator only got 900,000 votes. Lenny, for some reason, lost 500,000 votes, and Marcos gained 1.2 million votes and ended up with 100.5 million votes versus his 300 in 2016. I mean, was the campaign that great to swing the needle that much in that one province? And it's very, very doubtful. But
Yeah, I had my attention drawn to Cebu earlier by a person I was talking to before, Arlene, and Cebu does not have any so-called extreme frauds for president in my analysis, and it has about 25% of the votes for Marcos are incrementally fraudulent, which would imply, roughly speaking, about a third of those are due to, genuine bad acts. And the other 2/3 are due to this strategic behavior, according to the interpretation I'm carrying. And of course, I have no idea what actually happened in Cebu, but the person I was talking to said that if you do the numbers, it's a large proportion of the variations that you just talked about.
Yes.
And so I think
had the biggest variation out of all.
So it would require some detailed study using other information to see whether we interview some voters, maybe they'll tell you the truth of what they did. But that's partially accounted for in my estimates, and the interpretation is what's up for grabs.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for Ms. Carol Lopez again. With an IT audit, assuming it is allowed by the AES law and the COMELEC, reflect the anomalous, questionable results as discussed by the three speakers. And similarly, Tom Choi said, would an e-forensic audit of the 2022 elections, can that be something that we could propose?
Well, in general, I'll just say that a so-called risk limiting audit, where if there's a paper, you compare the paper to electronic records, is a very good technology that I endorse. I don't know whether there's paper that has a sound chain of custody that you could compare to the electronic records at all. The one comparison I did was to the Afghanistan election in my other general paper, not the paper about the Philippines. And there they did an audit of the Afghan 2009 election. And the e-forensics estimates agreed with the Afghan audit results very closely. And so that's in my sort of measuring election frauds paper. And that's part of why I say that my story that the e-forensics estimates match reality is supported. I also have evidence there from French elections where the Constitutional Court evaluations and annulments of elections match the forensics estimates, as well as I look at some Mexican elections, and there they have annulments of ballot boxes. And again, e-forensics matches those decisions. There's a lot of strategic behavior in Mexico. So my prediction would be that if you were able to do an appropriate audit in the Philippines, that it would match the e-forensics estimates, though this ambiguity about the strategy versus genuine bad acts, it still comes in. So I'm not sure exactly what we should compare it to. So the track record, I think, is pretty good. I certainly can't say what would happen if you were to look at these SIM cards or other kinds of things, find evidence of vote buying, which is documented in one of the articles I read. They had many instances of vote buying documented, but that article said they weren't enough to have changed the outcome.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I guess the answer for that is yes, it's possible if there's an IT audit, but I guess the question is, who's going to pay for this audit and who's going to be part of the audit team, right? Right now they hold all the cards, so any audit that's made is still going to be questionable. So,
well,
being realistic here.
Actually, that leads into my next question from Ms. Elizabeth Carranza. What after this? Who will file the protest? Where will it be filed? The Supreme Court? What is being presented now? Will they be valid evidences?
Yeah, as I said earlier, the goal here is not to overturn the election at this point. I think we're past that mark now. Even if we do find a smoking gun, it might still be too late. Whether Lenny decide, actually I think it's Lenny that has to decide whether she wants to file an election protest or not, because she's the candidate that was affected, and because Philippine law has it that to contest an election you have to pay, I think, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, it's 500 pesos per vote contested. Yeah. So we're talking about 31 million votes here, and that's a lot of money. So I don't know if anyone's gonna cough up the money to put a protest up.
We already went over time. I just want to check with our panelists if they could stay for a little bit more, like 10 minutes more. Is that okay? All right, because there are a lot of questions, and there are people raising their hands, and we're gonna try our best to get through as much as we can. This is from Norma Amata, PPVR Chair, Zambales. If there is fraud, which I also believe for president and vice president, how about local candidates from congressmen to mayors?
I wouldn't have any data.
I haven't looked at any data. I do have such data in the transparency server data, and eventually I may get around to looking at that. I also have the Senate data, but the election system was so complicated that I wasn't able to look at it. So I have nothing to say about the Senate at all. It's feasible to do, but I just haven't done it using my tools.
Yes, I think the focus of the three panelists right now is more the presidential, vice presidential, and senatorial. So I don't think we have the answers to that, but purely conjecture. I'm sure there's those elections could also be fraudulent. Then the next one is this is a question for Dr. Mebane. If your model is used during an actual election as the votes are being reported to point out malevolent votes or manufactured votes as they are being reported, would this help to keep voting honest?
Well, that's a huge question. The technical details is that the model does not have a so-called online version at the moment. So the idea of partial election results is not clear. Some of my colleagues around the country in the United States have such methods. And so it might be useful to see what they could do. Whether science or scientific results would persuade political actors, I have my doubts. Just thinking of the United States now, we have huge problems of skepticism about our elections, and I think facts and science have very little to do with the effort to overthrow our government. So I'm not sure that at this point or ever it would really discipline people's behavior. Sad to say.
There's a lot more questions for you, Dr. Mebane. This is from Dr. Ador Torneo. In the context of your presentation, what do malevolent distortions, manufactured votes, and strategic elector behavior mean? How are these estimated, and what is the logic behind them?
Yeah, I can't answer all those questions. I would say see the Measuring Election Frauds paper, the URL of which I put in the chat for a extremely terse description that addresses all of those concerns. Just very briefly, I'll say that malevolent distortions, my view is that you have an accurate election when the election result reflects the intentions of the electors. And so the fraud is precisely when an election does not reflect the intentions of the electors. And so this is why I refer to malevolent distortions to cover all manners of ways of committing fraud, but they all have this common result that they produce errors where the results don't match what people wanted to do when they cast their votes. And this is my attempt to simplify what fraud actually means and make it an operational concept. Strategic behavior essentially means when people act in ways that pay attention to what other voters are going to do. And so if I just go and vote based on what I want and ignore everybody else, then that's not strategic. But if I'm paying attention to others, like I'm going to abandon a candidate because they're losing, so I'll vote for my second choice, or as purportedly is happening in this Philippine election, we're talking about if, elites say, rally around the Duterte and Marcos, and people do that because they see everybody else or a lot of other people or some other people doing that, that coordination between individuals is strategic behavior. And again, there are many, many ways to do strategic behavior. How the model estimates the results, I'll just say, see the paper, but the bottom line is that both frauds especially, cause dependencies between different individuals' votes. They're all like shoved in the direction of the bad guy who's benefiting from the votes instead of just being randomly, this way or that way. And so those dependencies are captured by the model that I showed you in a glance in the one paper. So if that model is a good description of the way the votes are being misattributed, then features of the count data will be sufficient to inform the Bayesian model to the estimate. At least that's my claim. And you can see the paper, Measuring Election Frauds, for a pretty terse but still complete description and motivation for the details of how I do that.
Thank you. And he already put the link in the chat. So if you'd like to go over that when you have time, that would be awesome. I would want to remind everyone that we are at capacity. Oh, actually 493 participants, but there's 38 people waiting in the room. We are live streaming at USFGG. So if you can't get in, just go to the Facebook. This next one is from Rosalia Maghari. Why not put a move for manual count of all good precincts, and those precincts with chaos and snatching of VCMs should be declared as failed election? I don't think it's up to us.
Yeah, again, it's up to the losing candidate to do that, and they've got to pay a lot of money to do that.
Yeah. What is that law that you said, like they have to pay 500 pesos for every contested vote? Yeah. Correct. So it's a big undertaking for someone to contest the votes. So yeah, it is what it is. From Mr. Jim Hernandez, can you expand a little bit about how e-forensics, I think this is for Professor Mebane, estimates votes stolen from opposing candidates? Does this take into account possibility of VCM counts being pre-programmed for a desired outcome? Yeah, actually.
Yeah, sure. Again, I won't try to explain in detail mathematically or statistically how it works. You can see the Measuring Election Frauds paper for a, unfortunately, too terse explanation of that. But the idea is that the particular in real world mechanism used to steal votes or manufacture votes does not matter. So if the VBM is manipulated, or people are paid off, or they're threatened, or they have misinformation, all of these different varieties have different effects in distorting intentions. And the idea that I'm pursuing in my research is the extent to which e-forensics can capture all of those. Right now, I'm doing it in an inductive way, which means looking at hundreds of elections and seeing what happens. 5 years from now, I hope to have done some modeling to be able to do in a slightly more deductive way, where you generate synthetic elections and see how it turns into e-forensics estimates. And that's not here yet. So that won't be in the book I'm writing, but hopefully 4 years after that, I'll have done some of that. I've done some preliminary work on that, but that will presumably either show that it actually does what I say, hope it does. I should say hope, because I don't know whether it does it, or it fails, or hopefully gives more refined interpretations. So this is the direction of the research program. But this particular mechanism, if you find fraudulent votes, it could be all kinds of ways that happen, which is why you need supplemental information from witness testimony and other kinds of credible things about what actually happened to flesh out the story.
Hey, Walter. So our election's in 6 years. So if you get your paper done,
I'll try to hurry. I'll try to hurry.
All right.
Right.
And we'll look out for your book. Again, we've been getting a lot of these questions. The purpose of this press con is to the reason for this presentation is to have to talk about election integrity and our democracy. This is not necessarily at this point to overturn the election. So, we have to point out if we have three experts in our panel who are pointing out where there are parts of the election that could have been fraudulent. So yes, so I'm just to address a lot of the questions or what are we going to do. The point of the press con is that we are showing you the findings of our analysts. So there we go. This is from Miss Bienvenida Vio Vicente. Many of us have that kind of suspicion, but they have proclaimed already. Can this? Okay, sorry, never mind. We already answered that. Okay, this is from Dr. Walter Mebane.
Nope, I didn't send it. Must be for me, maybe.
It's for you. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. In the context of presentation, okay, that's already answered as well. Sorry, guys. This is like a 500-person chat, so it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Give me a second. All right. What about the random manual audit as prescribed by law that happened at the Diamond Hotel? Any updates from NAMFREL? not for us as well. I don't think
Yeah,
anyone
Gus
knows.
was supposed to be here today, but he's in
Yeah.
another conference.
Yeah, sorry, he's another conference. He would have been able to answer that. Can we not still do anything to establish the truth in this recent election?
Trust me, we all want, that's what we all want, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's possible at this point. But again, it's up to Lenny, and if Lenny decides that she wants to, for some reason, decides she wants to put up a protest, and definitely, we have some things to back her up with some numbers, and we'll do our best. But unless that happens, it doesn't look like it's going to be a way forward, except for just to make sure our next election is better.
Yeah. This is another question for you, Engineer Daly. What about the issue of fixed ratio between Marcos and Lenny? Have you heard about that?
The 47% that was showing up on day one of the elections. So that number, I also noticed that number as well initially, and I think they were able to sufficiently prove that was not an issue. I mean, they're stating the law of big numbers is the reason for that percentage showing up, and if they show the incremental changes, yes, you're going to see some variation, which makes some sense. And PPCRV allowed academics to look at the numbers and dissect the numbers. I mean, the worst thing that would have done is to just show an early trend and project that trend. And now that we have all the numbers in, supposedly anyway, so those percentages won't hold water in terms of the protest. That I don't think it's really easy to prove that was not an intentional anomaly, or so. Although it looked like an anomaly at the start, it's easily to be proven wrong when looked at. And I think the ones who looked at the numbers, I didn't look at it myself, but the people who did look at it are pretty credible, and they were able to see that there was no issues with those numbers. Again, they were looking at numbers from the ER, which our question is, we're questioning the numbers before the ER, right? So any numbers after the ER are going to be. My analogy is I compare it to someone taking an exam and cheating off his seatmate. Okay, so he copies all the answers from his seatmate, submits it to the teacher. The teacher is going to grade the exam. He's going to get 100, right? Because he copied off the smartest kid in the class. Unless he saw that he was cheating, it's not going to be. I mean, the ERs are just checking those numbers, where the cheating might have already been done. Okay, so it's not really. So to answer your question, the constant ratio issue, it's not an issue anymore.
Sadly.
Yeah. All right.
I want to read out a comment from Ms. Catherine Milagrosa. I wouldn't mind the election of BBM and Duterte if it was shown as a strategic shift of voters. What I mind is that they had to distort the numbers so that they won by a wide margin. That is just ego massage. Yeah, they've been flaunting that 31 million all over. But
let me just comment on that. I mean, the question is, if they were going to win anyway, why would they cheat? And the answer is a lot of people do that. That's a very frequent behavior, because people want to have even bigger margins, look more invincible, or their ego gets in the way. So, and they also need to maintain their apparatus. If they have people they pay, for example, to do various things to corrupt the vote, if they didn't need them in this election, they will need them in the